Hello and welcome to your Lettings Finance training. In this video, we will be looking at landlord payments. That will include running your landlord payments, reallocation of balances, and producing remittance advice and your landlord statements. Jumping over into Expert Agent, your landlord payment section will be found via the top finance menu and under the payments submenu. When you click on your landlord payments tab, it will open up and the screen will look something like this. Contained within the screen will be any landlords who have balances that are available to pay. If your landlord doesn't have any balance that's available to pay to them, they will not be showing in this screen. You will purely be looking at any landlords who have balances available to pay to them. So in practice, those will be your rents that you've received in that are now available to pay across to your landlords. Your landlords will display in this section in one of two ways. They will either be in red or they will be in blue. Your landlords who are in red will always appear at the top of this screen and they will be in alphabetical order based on their surname. Your landlords who are in blue will always follow those landlords who are in red, and again they will be in alphabetical order based on their surname. All your blue landlords will be automatically selected for payment. You'll see in the blue bar alongside each name there's an include all on the right hand side, and the include all tick boxes are automatically ticked there. You will notice that the red landlords do not have that same option. They are not automatically selected for payment. And the reason behind that is as follows. Expert Agent deems that your landlords who are in blue are straightforward landlord payments. So they are probably your landlords who have had rent come in, there's maybe a management fee and maybe another couple of invoices to be deducted from the payment amount, and then there's a straightforward balance to be paid to the landlord. Your landlords who are in red are the opposite side of that. They are the landlords the expert agent deems there to either be a problem with the payment, maybe something's been entered incorrectly and it's causing the payment not to quite look right, or a decision to be made as to whether you want to make a payment to that landlord or not. So for that reason, your blue landlords are all selected by default, whereas your red ones aren't, because expert agent doesn't want you to accidentally make a payment to one of those landlords without checking it first. Just because the red landlords aren't automatically selected for payment, it doesn't mean that there isn't a payment to make to them. As we said at the start of this video, if there wasn't a payment to make to them, they wouldn't be showing in this screen. We will have a look shortly at a couple of scenarios as to why your landlords might be showing in red and exactly what that means, just to give you some more information on that. But just to reiterate, just because they're in red, it doesn't mean that there's no payment to make to them. So please don't ignore your landlords who show in red in this section. They won't disappear from there on their own. They won't necessarily turn back to blue on their own. Please make sure you're aware of why your landlords are showing in red there. Make any corrections if needed and just keep an eye on them. Please don't make a payment from the bank to these landlords if you think that they should be showing in blue and there should be a straightforward payment to make to them without first making the correction in Expert Agent. If you do that, Expert Agent won't give you a correct representation of what's gone through the bank and your accounts won't reconcile. So it's really important if you've got a landlord showing in red and you don't believe that they should be, to get the correction made, process the payment in Expert Agent as normal and make the payment from the bank as normal. If you ever need any help and assistance as to why your landlord's showing in red and you can't figure that out, please log a support ticket and the support team will pick that up and help you out with it. So just because our blue landlords are selected by default and our red ones aren't, it doesn't mean that that's the payment we have to make. At the top of this screen, we've got a deselect all payments button, so I can click that one there. We'll get a green pop-up to confirm that all landlords have been deselected, and now at this moment I have no one selected for payment. Deselecting everybody will allow you to just go through and make individual or a couple of payments rather than making large payments in bulk, so if you prefer to do it that way, you can by all means. So let's look into the individual landlords in a bit more detail now. Each landlord will display with their name and how many properties they have with payments to make, and they'll also show an overall balance for that landlord. What you can do is ticking the downward facing arrow alongside each of those landlords in turn. is see a breakdown of what that balance is made up of. So for each landlord in this section, on the left-hand side, you'll see the property that the payment is for, and you'll see a summary of what that payment is going to be. So for Miss Brown here, the property her payment is for is 51 Fell Road. We'll see that that property has a balance of £440, and that's made up of an income total of £500, no deposits, £60 worth of outstanding invoices, no non-resident tax, a retention that we're wanting to place on this property on behalf of the landlord of £100, which would mean we will be making a payment to the landlord of £340. So that's the summary on the left-hand side there. On the right-hand side, we'll be able to see the individual transactions that are making up that summary. So under the green section, property received funds, we'll be able to see any rents or other kinds of receipts that have come in. So for Miss Brown here, there's a rent receipt from the 10th of June to the 9th of July of £500. And then under the red outstanding invoices section, you'll always be able to see any invoices on that landlord account that are still to be paid. So any outstanding invoices there. And for Miss Brown on this occasion, it's just a 10% management fee at £60, which is making up the outstanding invoices total there. Okay, so that's that one. If we just move down, we've got Mr. Care, who's the next landlord down here. If we click the downward facing arrow alongside his name, we can see that he's got two properties there with a balance of £756.40. And his balance relates to number 8 Trent Road, which has a balance itself of £316.40, which is made up of £350 worth of income, less £33.60 worth of invoices. So again, on the right-hand side, we can see that's a May to June rent receipt and the June management fee there. Now he's got two properties, so if we scroll down, we'll be able to see the second property as well, which is 6 Trent Road, which has a balance of £440, which is a £500 income, this rent receipt here, and £60 worth of invoices, this invoice here. So your landlords will always display with a breakdown of their balance on a property by property basis. So if your landlord has one property, as Ms. Brown did, that will just show there the one property. If there are multiple properties, they will show listed as with Mr. Care here. So my third landlord down there is Mr. Cat. Again, if we click the downward facing arrow there, we'll see that his balance is for 1 Church Row. And he's got £1,000 income there coming from that rent receipt. And he's got £195 worth of outstanding invoices coming from a 10% management fee and also a gas safety certificate there. So that would be a payment amount of £805. What you'll also see alongside Mr. Cat, there's an information symbol there. That's designed and it's therefore to alert you to the fact that there are some payment notes on this landlord. If I click that there, I'll be able to see the notes that are recorded alongside this landlord. So I've got a note that I'm not to deduct any purchase invoices from the rent and the landlord will be paying these to us individually. So what I want to do is ensure that I'm not including this gas safety certificate in the payment. I don't want to deduct that from the rent. So if I untick that invoice there, what we'll see is that my outstanding invoices total has changed to £120, which is just the management fee. And my payment amount has increased to £880. So I'm going to be paying the landlord for the £1,000 rent, less the £120 invoice, which is my £880. And I'm going to be leaving my gas safety certificate as an outstanding invoice on the landlord record because the landlord's going to be making that payment to us individually. So you can use your information sign there, your payment notes on the landlord to alert you to anything that's important in terms of payments for this particular landlord. The way you can add those onto the record if you want to is if you open your landlord record and go to the Financial Details tab, you'll have the Payment Notes section on the right-hand side here. So entering anything in that screen will pull that through as an information sign alongside each landlord. If I scroll down my list a bit further, Mr. Hooper here, if I click the downward facing arrow alongside his name, we can see that his balance is for 8 Lodge Gardens. So the income is 2475, which is this rent receipt here. This landlord also has a deposit to be passed to him of £1,500. You'll see that the income and the deposits are listed separately because any deposit that you're passing to the landlord for them to register themselves, if that's the way they're treating the deposits, if they're let-only landlords, for example, the deposit isn't income for the landlord, so that needs to be kept separately. So you'll see that display under the summary as it is here. Something else you might see within your landlord payment section, if you have any landlords who are non-resident, you'll see the income and the expenses showing as normal there. What you'll also see is at this point, you'll now see something in the tax section. So our rent less our invoices, which gives us our balance. Expert agent will then set to deduct tax from that balance for you, and that balance will be retained from the landlord payment, so held back from that landlord payment in your client account for you to make that payment over to HMRC at the end of the quarter. So those are our blue landlords. Each landlord will display in this section with the number of properties they've got payments available to make for and an overall balance. If you're unsure on that balance, you want to look into that in a bit more detail, you're just using the downward facing arrow alongside the landlord name to investigate what's there. If you find when you're doing that there's something missing, so for example on this landlord there should be an additional contractor invoice to be deducted, you can jump into the landlord record from here, add your invoice on as normal, and then come back to landlord payments where it will show to be deducted. If we move on now to look at some of the red landlords and a couple of examples as to why your landlords might be showing in red there. If we start with my landlord at the top here, Miss Fleming, she's got one property at a balance of -874. We can click the downward facing arrow alongside our red landlords in the same way that we can with our blue to see what that balance is made up of. So we can see the property here. We can see on the right hand side that there's a rent receipt there of £200. And under the outstanding invoices section, we can see that there are two invoices. One is the 10% management fee, which is linked to that rent receipt there. And the second is a purchase invoice of £1,050. So our landlord's -874 balance is made up of the rent receipt less these two invoices. Now, the reason this landlord's showing in your landlord payment section, even though there's a negative balance there, is because Expert Agent is alerting you to the fact that the rent has come in on this property. So we've had a rent that's come in. The decision that you need to make is what you're going to do with that rent receipt. Are you going to pay that rent receipt to the landlord as normal, so pay them their £200 rent less their £24 management fee, and ignore that £1,050 invoice? It may be you've got the scenario where the landlord's having a lot of work done at the property, maybe there's been an insurance job, something like that, so they're going to be making a separate payment to you, making a payment into your client account for any invoices. You may have agreed with the landlord that you're going to pay them their rent less their management fee in the meantime. It may be that the landlord's got a new tenant moving in and there's going to be a big lump sum coming in next month, so you've agreed that you're going to deduct that invoice from next month's rent. There could be numerous scenarios where you'd want to do this, but if you do want to do that, what you're going to do is you're going to tick the pay ? Box under the property address. You're going to tick the rent receipt under the received funds, and you're going to tick the management fee under the received funds. What will happen then is the payment amount on the left-hand side will change to 176 to indicate that that's the amount you're going to be recording as paying to the landlord. So you can edit your landlord payments in that way there. Just because this landlord was in red, just because there's a negative balance on there, it doesn't mean that there's no payment to make to them. Rent has come in on the property, so there are some available funds. Just as an example here, if I try to tick this invoice, I'll get a pop-up to say that there are insufficient funds to complete this. I only have 176 available. That's not enough to fully pay this 1050. Another scenario with this landlord might be that we've agreed with the landlord that they're not going to get a payment until that 1050 is cleared off. So we're going to hold on to the rent, and we're going to keep holding on to rents that come in until they've cleared this balance and they have again got a positive balance on the property. If that's the case, we're going to leave everything unticked. We're going to leave this landlord collapsed, and we're just going to leave them there sat in red. They will stay in this screen sat in red until their balance is back in the positive, at which point they will turn blue and you'll be able to process them as normal. The third scenario that you might want to look at on this landlord might be if you're going to partially pay this invoice with the money that you've got available. You can do that from the landlord payment screen as well. In that scenario, we would tick the pay question mark box under the property. We would tick our rent under the received funds, and we would tick our management fee under the received funds. So we know from this payment amount here, we've now got £176 to play with, so we can part pay our £1,050 invoice with 176. To do that, we're going to overtype the receive amount on the right-hand side with our 176 that we have available, and we're then going to tick that invoice. What that will do at this point is it will change the payment amount to 0, so we're not physically paying the landlord any money. We're using the 200 that's come in to fully pay our management fee and to partially pay our contractor invoice. And that will leave the landlord with a negative balance of the difference between what we're paying and the invoice total on their landlord record to either be deducted from the next month rent, or the same thing to happen again, it get partially paid with the next rent that comes in. Once we process that 0 landlord payment, what you'll find is this landlord will no longer show in the landlord payment section, because at that point there are no longer any available funds to use. We've used the £200 that came in. There's now no payment to make, so they won't show in this section at all. So you've got options there with your landlords when they have negative balances, depending on what you're wanting to do, and you're able to use Expert Agent to reflect that there. If we have a look at our second landlord in red, Mr. Perry there, he's got 2 properties with a balance of £516. We click the downward facing arrow alongside him. We can see that his balance is made up of 2 properties there, which is flat 2, 10 Dorchester Street, and 4 Prince's Buildings. Flat 2, 10 Dorchester Street has a rent receipt of £700 and a 10% management fee of £84, which gives it a positive balance of £616. If we scroll down to Prince's Buildings there, we can see that there's a rent receipt there of £200 and there's a purchase invoice for a carpet clean of £300. So 4 Prince's Buildings has a negative balance of £100. So the two balances together, the 616 and the 100, gives the landlord their overall balance of 516. So the reason this landlord's in red, the reason they are in red is because there are 2 properties there, one with a positive and one with a negative balance. Again, you've got options. Do you want to just pay the landlord for this property, just pay them for 10 Dorchester Street, and then 4 Prince's Buildings will sit with a negative balance until enough money comes in on this property to cover that invoice? If that's the case, you're going to tick the pay question mark box underneath our property in question. We're going to tick our rent receipt and we're going to tick our management fee. The payment amount will change to £616 at this point. So we're going to record that we've made a £616 payment to this landlord for this property, and we're going to ignore this one. We're not going to tick anything there because there's not enough money to pay the landlord on that one. The other option that we might want to consider is that our landlord might want us to use some money from Dorchester Street to cover the balance on Prince's Buildings. So if your landlord wants that to happen and you've agreed with your landlord that you're going to use money from one property to cover an invoice on the other, what you'll need to do at this stage is what's called a reallocation of balance. So you're going to go onto your landlord record, and what you're going to do is a right-click, Financial, Reallocate Balances. This pop-up will appear, and Expert Agent will ask you to confirm the transaction date, which is today's date for us. It will ask you for the from property, so where is the money that you're wanting to move? So our money is on flat 2 Dorchester. The to property, where do you need that money to be moved to, which is Prince's Buildings for us. Once you set those options, Expert Agent will automatically prompt you how much you've got available to transfer, which is £700. We don't want to move £700, we just want to move £100 to cover the remaining negative on that property. So I'm going to overtype my amount to transfer with £100. Expert Agent will also automatically generate a description for this transfer, which will be reallocate funds from one property to the other property. You can overtype that description if you want. So if you want to make that something more specific as to what you're doing, you can change that description if needed. Once you're happy, you're going to save. And if we now come back to our landlord payments section and filter that screen there, that will just pull through the changes that we've made. So what we'll see now is Mr. Perry is no longer in red. If we find him, he's in blue there. If we click the downward facing arrow alongside his name, what we'll see is that for flat 2 Dorchester Street, the balance, the payment amount is now £516. Okay, because that's our £700 less our £100 that we've transferred over to the other property, less the management fee, gives a payment amount for that property of £516. And if we scroll down to look at Princess Buildings, we'll see that the balance on this property is now £0, and that's made up of our £200 rent receipt as before. Here's our reallocation of funds. So we've moved some income from one property to the other, so that £100 is now showing under Princess Buildings. And there's the purchase invoice of 300. So we've technically got 300 less 300, giving us our £0 payment amount. And then we can process that payment as normal. So we've got two options there with your landlords if they've got multiple properties and one has a positive balance and one has a negative. You've got that reallocation of funds option there available to move money between the two properties. So once you've checked through and amended any red landlords and you're happy with who you've got selected, just double check who you've got ticked on the right hand side and double check under any red landlords that you've made your selections correctly if you're making payments to them. You'll then want to come up to the top and just confirm the payment date, so it will default to today's date, but if you're needing to backdate or forward date any payments, you can do that using that black calendar there. Just confirm that you are making the payments from your default client account, and then you're going to click the red Pay Landlords button on the right hand side. You'll get a pop-up asking you if you're sure if you want to pay these landlords, so you're going to select yes there, and the process will run through for you. The process shouldn't take too long, but the more landlords that you're processing payments for, the longer that will take. But Expert Agent will keep you updated with how far down the list it's got. Once the last landlord in your list has been paid, the processing will display as been completed, and you'll be able to click here to close. Selecting click here to close will complete that payment process, and what will open up automatically for you will be the payments to make report. This is the report that you will then physically use to make your payments to your landlords. It will display the date you've made the payment amount, the landlord that payment is for, the property that payment is for. It will also confirm the bank details that that payment needs to go to. So that will all display on this screen for you. So in theory, you should be able to print this report out using the print button in the top right hand corner, or export it out into a CSV, log on to your online banking and work your way down this list making the payments. If you use bank export, so you make your payments in bulk, you can click Create Bank Export from this screen, select your bank in question, confirm whether it's just your landlords or your landlords and contractors that you're wanting to process, and click Save. And that will open up in the bottom for you your export, which you can then import into your online banking to physically make those payments in bulk. So if you use bank export, that option's there. If not, it's just logging onto your online banking and making those payments as per this list. If you've got landlords who have multiple properties, don't forget your payments in Expert Agent are on a property by property basis, so each property will display in this list separately. So you'll see for Mr. Care here, we've got 8 Trent Road and also 6 Trent Road. If your landlord has their payments go to the same bank account, obviously we'll see we've got the same bank account listed here. What you can do is ask Expert Agent to group the payments by payee. So if I tick that box there and just refresh the report by clicking the report button, Mr. Care will now show in here only once with 75640 balance, which is the amalgamated balance of the two properties. So rather than having to make the two payments individually, which are going straight to the same bank, rather than having to add those up manually, we can select to group payments by payee, and that will do that for us. If we click the downward facing arrow that now appears alongside my landlord, we'll be able to see a breakdown of those two payments. If you've got any landlords who have multiple properties and the payments go to separate bank accounts, obviously they will always display separately there because those payments need to go to separate places. So once you've physically made your payments, the next thing to have a look at will be producing some documentation for your landlords to show them what you've paid. And in terms of doing this in Expert Agent, you have two options. You have remittance advice and you also have landlord statement. The two options will show you different information. With your remittance advice and your statements, you have the option to print them or email them using those four buttons there. And you will be printing or emailing for everyone who is ticked in this list. So everyone who has this tick in the tick box on the left-hand side will be included in the print or email run. So if there's anyone for any reason you wanted to exclude from the list, you could untick them there. Now, in terms of choosing between remittance and statements, there's a really helpful FAQ in the manual. If you go to your top help menu and go to Learning Centre, under your FAQs section, under Lettings Finance, you'll find an FAQ for statement versus remittance. And we would thoroughly recommend reading through this FAQ. It gives you lots of information on the difference between remittance and statements, with links through to help pages on the manual and producing both. So please do visit that FAQ and have a look at that before you get started running remittance or statements to work out which is going to be best for you. Just to cover those now though for you, remittance is a receipt for your landlord payment. So the remittance will show how much you've paid to your landlord and what that payment was made up of. So any receipts that were included in it and any invoices that were deducted from it. It's basically showing you a summary of everything you selected on your landlord payment screen to be included in the payment. Statements on the other side of that are a statement of your landlord's account with you. So you will run your statements for a particular period, and that statement will show anything that's gone on that landlord's account within that period. So any receipts that have come in, any invoices that have been charged, and any payments that have been made to the landlord. Because it's not focusing on the payment that the landlord has had, it's an overview of their account with you. If an invoice has been charged but not included in the payment, it will show on the statement. If there is a balance to be carried forward or a balance brought forward, again, that will show on the statement. If no payment was made, again, that will show as a balance on that landlord statement. So the statement is a real overview of the account, broken down into lots of detail, whereas the remittance is a more basic document, and the remittance shows the landlord exactly what they've been paid for. So if you're looking to show your landlord what they've been paid for, please use the remittance option. What you may want to do is send your landlord a remittance with each payment that you make to them, and then produce them a statement at the end of the year, end of the quarter maybe, to give them an overview of their account, but use the remittance on a payment by payment basis. Obviously, you may wish to send your landlord a statement each month instead of remittance, but please do be aware of the difference between the two, what shows on a remittance versus what shows on a statement, and make that decision which option you want to go with before you start sending out documents to your landlord. And please do make use of that FAQ in the manual to help you decide. So we'll have a look at running both now so you can see examples of what both look like, and we'll have a look at printing and emailing them and the different ways that works. What I'm going to do is untick everybody and just tick one of my landlords so we can have a look at an example. But obviously, if you leave all your landlords selected and do a remittance or a statement run for everyone selected there, the remittance or statements will print or email separately to each landlord in the list. So if we start with remittance advice, If I'm to click Print Remittance Advice, the options I get are to group the remittance by property or group the remittance by landlord. These options only really become relevant for your landlords who have multiple properties. If your landlords have multiple properties, you get the option as to whether you want them to have a completely separate remittance for each of their properties. If that's the case, you're going to group by property. Or if you want the landlord to receive one document containing the remittance for each property, you'll select Group by Landlord. So separate emails for Group by Property, one email for Group by Landlord. In experience, most landlords will ask for a separate document, so you will select Group by Property, which is why that is selected by default there. You'll then choose to save, and that will take you through to your Select a Template screen. If you already have your remittance set up, it will display here under your Our Letters. If not, if you go to Expert Agent Default Letters, there are two remittance templates to choose from, Remittance Advice and Remittance Advice Detailed. So you can select the one you want and then click on it to produce the remittance, and it will open up on the screen as follows. If I select Print just to show you a print preview there. So it will contain all your details at the top there based on how you've got that template set up, address to your landlord. It will confirm the property you've paid them for, how much you've paid them and when you've paid them, and then below it will give you a breakdown of the payment. So the receipts, less any sales invoices, with a VAT breakdown of that sales invoice there for you, and also any purchase invoices listed separately, and a total that you've deducted at the bottom. So that's the remittance for you there. If we're wanting to email those to our landlord rather than print them, we'll select to email remittance advice. Again, we'll have the same group by property, group by landlord selection. We'll get the option to confirm the email subject. Please bear in mind that this will be the subject that goes to each of your landlords, so keep it something generic, not specific to a particular landlord or property. You'll be asked to select the email body template, so this will be the email that the landlords get themselves. So it'll be sort of a cover letter for the email, if you will. You'll then select your remittance template, which will be the remittance itself. So what we've done now is we've told Expert Agent we want to send the landlord an email with the remittance attached. So the landlords will get that remittance as a PDF attachment to the cover email that you send. If we tick this tick box here to untick emailed records on completion, if anyone within our selection that we've made to send the emails to isn't set up to receive emails, they will remain ticked on the screen once we've processed the remittance. And that will allow us to see anyone that we then need to print the remittance for. So once we're happy, we're going to save. And you'll be notified how many remittances have been queued to email. And if any have failed, that will show there as well. And we'll be alerted once the emails have been sent. So we can OK there. Because the tick has come out of that box, we know that that email has been sent. And as soon as we get our notification at the top here that that email has gone, a copy of that remittance will appear on the landlord record under the Events tab so that we can reopen it and have a look at what we sent from there. Statement options work in very much the same way. If we're printing our statements, we're going to click Print Statement there. We've got different filtering options. We can filter to show on the statement anything that's been added since the last date we printed the statement, or we can run the statement for a specific date range. So this might be the option you're using if you're running an annual statement, to run the statement by a specific date range there. Based on the option that you select though, you're going to save. Again, that takes you through to your template screen. If you have your statement set up, it will appear in your Our Letters. If not, you'll just go across to your default letters and you'll select your template in question. So your statement will open on the screen. Again, if we click Print here, so the statement will show any transactions that have gone through the landlord account for the period in question. So for us, since the last statement transaction was run. So I've got a negative opening balance there on my account, which the landlord then made the payment to us for. We've got our rent receipt that's come in and our management fee that relates to that. along with the purchase invoice, and there's the payment that we made today. Okay, so our statements are more of an overview of the account. They will include anything that's happened on that landlord account within the period, rather than just focusing on the payment itself as the remittance does. If I close that print option down and look at the email instead, again, you get your same selections and you select your templates in the same way that you would for your remittance. We get the tick box again as we would for the remittance, and we save when we're happy. And again, we get the same pop-up to confirm that my statement's been queued to send and that we'll get a notification when it's sent. Again, because the ticks come out of the tick box there, we know that that's gone. And once that's sent, an event will get logged on the landlord record so that we can have a look at what we've sent and open it up from there. So those are your 4 options in terms of output. You've got printing or emailing remittance, printing or emailing statements. Can't recommend enough that you have a think about whether it's remittance or statements that you want to use before you get started processing your payments in Expert Agent, and use the FAQ within the Learning Centre to help you make your decision. Our remittance and statement have both sent now. I've got my notifications in the top. So if I was to go to my landlord record and look under the events tab, there's my confirmation that my statement sent, and I can view it there. And there's my confirmation that my remittance is sent, and again I can view it there. We hope that you found this video helpful. Thanks for taking the time to watch.